Now that I've said all of this, I'm going to add, and as I've actually hinted at already, that both a pastor and a church system are mainly intermediate stages for God's children. Intermediate. And whether a pastor has been a dictator to us, or even if he has been a very good spiritual father, there's a time when a child needs to eventually grow up and to become an adult themselves. Did you hear that? Some people would say, though, that we need to become children in order to get into the kingdom. Not only so, but to remain children. Be not deceived by those who misunderstand certain biblical passages. For just like a natural parent will always consider their own kids their children, even into adulthood, we would always be God's children too. But we should never be children in our understandings. For in our understandings we have to be adults, lest we be so easily taken in by evil. 1 Corinthians 14:20. Brethren, be not children in understanding, howbeit in malice be children, but in understanding be men, adults. In fact, the scriptures are full of ideas of us growing up. 1 Corinthians 13:11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, an adult, I put away childish things. Let's take this a little further. And within these next quoted scriptures, I'm going to display some helpful notes. Even if you decide to read these passages in your own Bible, please read my quotes also so that you can see where I'm heading with this. Ephesians 4:11 through 24. He gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers, as we've been saying, which again aren't the only gifts and callings of the ministry, but these represent the top leadership positions, for the perfecting, maturing of the saints. These callings are to help children to grow up, for the work of the ministry, to help these children to grow up to be ministers themselves, if possible, for the edifying of the body of Christ, until, showing a limitation to be under a man's headship, we all come into the unity of the faith, of which Abraham is the father of, and of the knowledge of the Son of God, into a perfect man, i.e., a grown, mature adult, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we henceforth be no more children. You see that? We now should be adults, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. Again, by these dictators I've been talking about, these deceivers. But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, Christ. Christ is the head. Christ is the only head. Man's never the headship. For again, leadership and headship are two total different things, as I've been talking about. From whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplies, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, making increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. And this I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you henceforth walk not as other Gentiles are walking, that is, in the spirit of a Gentile, which we have already talked about earlier in this book, in the earlier videos, that is, a not usurping unmerited authority, in the vanity of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them because of the blindness of their hearts, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lasciviousness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. But you have not so learned Christ. Be a true man or a woman of God instead. If so be that you have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning the former conversation the old man which is corrupt according to the deceitful lust. Be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. Again, growing up to an acceptable adult that is accepted by God. Now that I've said all of this, I'm going to ask the question again. If Christ is our head, what further need do we have for the headship of man? As I've pointed out already several times before, there is a big difference between headship and leadership. A true leader, of which we even have learned in the business and the working world, is a person who leads by example, not finger pointing. Matthew 23, 1 through 4. In fact, read the whole chapter in Matthew for a good example of a spiritual Pharisee. A person who has a spirit of a Pharisee. Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to the disciples, saying, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Modern day terms, a leadership pastoral seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not after their works, for they say and they do not. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders. But they themselves, they will not move them with one of their fingers. Friends, if Jesus' description describes your own pastor, then I say that you've got a big problem on your hands. But the point that I'm trying to get at in this present explanatory note is again in saying that a leader or spiritual father should only be a temporal thing for a Christian. But it's not the final stage. For the student, even though on occasion there will be some of whom, and no matter how hard we try and work with them, they're never going to grow up enough to gain such a freedom for their own selves. There is a time in everybody's life to where we actually do need a leader, a father, to guide us into the right direction, and I fully encourage such an enterprise as that. But then I've also been saying that same leader father should know when it's time to let go of the student if they see them growing into adulthood in God. I know that I've already said this a few times before, but where I'm going at this time is in saying that even if the leader or the father were a very good influence and a help, that there is a time in a lot of people's lives to where they simply must grow up and move out on their own. Again, even if they remain in a single church building as a help or government, they will be their own man or their own woman as far as allowing God to be their king, their headship. Even if they don't make final decisions for that present church that they're working in, God is their head instead of any man. An allowance from a leader who allows a child to be an adult will show us a true separation in being just a leader and being a head. For again, a leader / father will not only help a person to grow up, but will know when it is time to let that person out on their own. But a head will keep them suppressed and under themselves, and they will not let them go. We can certainly become a leader, a spiritual parent, but we are never allowed to become the head over another person, for that right alone belongs to God. On the other side of that coin, a grown student will have to learn how to disengage themselves from being under a man too, not to become too dependent upon their continued leadership and control. For just as it's unnatural for children in a home environment, not a church environment in this situation, to stay under their parents' leadership and to head out and live their life on their own, God expects us to grow up also in like manner to become our own adult in the church world. Not as in stopping our love and respect for our former church leadership, no more than in stopping our love for our natural parents, but not relying on and obeying every single word from these natural men and women. We've got to learn how to obey God instead, to hear from God ourselves. But like I've already said, this will not happen for everybody, as some or even many people, they can't handle the world at large to be on their own, and they need constant guidance and leadership for the rest of their natural lives. But that's actually okay. It's okay. For God will still help these people to become whom God wishes for them to be in His church world. So don't push at them. It will just happen, okay? And there's nothing that we can do about this except, of course, to pray that they remain under a kind-hearted, loving parent. We're going to continue to explore all these sorts of ideas throughout this book. Again, we're just beginning with all of this. We're just on chapter 3 here.